1492 Discovery of a New World. Christopher Columbus was the first man who wanted to find a direct route to Asia. He stumbled on a new world called America. On his first voyage, he arrived on his ship Santa Maria, Pinta and near the island Arawaks, Bahamas in 1492. The natives of Arawaks gave Columbus and his crew a warm welcome. His second voyage led them to the Caribs. The inhabitants believed that they and their ships were gods who came from the skies. But the natives were only seen as a strong and productive workforce. Columbus ordered some of his men to stay behind, built a fort and trade with the inhabitants. After a while, the Spanish discovered gold and silver on the island of Hispaniola. Therefore, the Spanish searched on the other Caribbean islands and investigated the north of the American continent. 1565. The oldest city in the United States. The Spanish explorer and treasure hunter Don Juan Ponce de León first sighted the mainland of the North American continent in 1513. He claimed the land for Spain and named it La Florida, meaning land of flowers. Between 1513 and 1563, the government of Spain launched 6 expeditions to settle Florida, but all failed. The French succeeded in establishing a fort and a colony on the St. John's River in 1564, and threatened Spain's treasure fleets, which sailed along Florida's shoreline, returning to Spain. As a result of this incursion into Florida, King Philip II named Don Pedro Menéndez de Aviles, Spain's most experienced admiral, as governor of Florida. Philip II instructed him to explore and to colonize the territory. Menéndez arrived off the coast of Florida in August 1565. 11 days later, he and his 600 men came ashore at the side of the Timucuan Indian village. He fortified the captured village and named it Saint Augustine. After brilliant military maneuvers, Menéndez destroyed the French garrison on the St. John's River and, with the help of a hurricane, also defeated the French fleet. With the coast of Florida in Spanish hands, he built the town, established missions to the Indians for the church, and explored the land. The town was burnt and sacked by the English buccaneers Sir Francis Drake in 1586 and Capt. John Davis in 1665. St. Augustine is the oldest lasting European settlement on the North American continent. 1607 The first British colony. In June 1606, King James I of England allowed the Virginia Company to settle an English colony in the Chesapeake region of North America. In December 100 for men started to North America with 4 ships, named Sarah, Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery to search for gold and to build the colony. In May 1607, this group of explorers decided to settle on an island. They named the nearby river James, after their king. That is why the colonists called this settlement Jamestown. Although they have been attacked by the Algonquian Indians and had a lack of food, the English settlers were able to survive. Under the leadership of Captain John Smith, the colonists built a wooden fort for their protection. Lord Delaware, Jamestown's new governor, planned to deliver needed supplies and consequently gave the colony a chance to expand. After that, the British began to colonize all over what is now New England. The wars with the Algonquian ended after Pocahontas, the daughter of the Algonquian chief, married John Rolfe, a European settler. Jamestown was the first permanent British colony in North America. 1614 The Dutch in North America. In 1614, Dutch merchants established a trading post at Fort Orange. 10 years later, 30 families came from Holland to settle in this area, which was called New Netherland. The Dutch government gave trading rights to the Dutch West India Company. In the next few years, other colonists arrived and a large settlement was found on Manhattan Island. Peter Minuit, who became governor of New Netherland, bought the island from Native Americans in 1626 for $24. The biggest port on Manhattan was named New Amsterdam. With the intention of attracting new settlers, the Dutch West India Company offered free land along the Hudson River. Peter Stuyvesant became governor in 1646. The English fleet, which arrived in 1664, wanted to capture New Netherland. Governor Stuyvesant was willed to fight, but he did not get any support of the other settlers. And finally, he was forced to allow the English to take control of the land. New Amsterdam was renamed New York. 1620. Freedom of worship. In 1620, Thomas Weston, assisted by John Carver and Robert Cushman, hired the Mayflower and the Speedwell to undertake a voyage to base a colony in northern Virginia. The Speedwell turned out to be a leaky ship and was unable to make the voyage. Christopher Jones was the captain of the Mayflower when it took the Pilgrims to New England in 1620. Because of navigation problems and stormy weather, the ship sighted Cape Cod instead of Virginia on November 19th, after a 2-month voyage. Some time was spent in selecting a suitable place for the colony. On December 26th, the Pilgrims established Plymouth, Massachusetts. 1773. No taxation without representation. On May 10, 1773, the Parliament authorized the East India Tea Co. to export 500,000 pounds of tea to the American colonies to sell it without the usual duties and taxes. The citizens of Boston had not allowed the unloading of 3 British ships that arrived in Boston in November 1773 with 342 chests of tea. The Royal Governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, did not let the tea ships return to England until the duty has been paid. On the evening of December 16th, a group of Bostonians, led by the American patriot Samuel Adams, and disguised as Mohawks, boarded the ship and dumped the tea into Boston Harbor. The British closed the port because Boston's government did not want to pay for the lost tea. The Boston Tea Party increased the conflict between the colonists and Britain. 1775. The way to independence. The American Revolution had some reasons. Social, economical, and political changes in the colonies before 1750 and, more important, the French and Indian War 1754-1763 changed the relationship between the colonies and their home country. Since 1765, the colonists had to pay for costs of the wars, which escalated in the Stamp Act crisis. 1 year later, the Townshend Law was passed. It imposed taxes on tea, paper, glass, paint, and lead, so the Americans rejected these payments because of not having been allowed to send delegates to the British Parliament. No taxation without representation. After the confrontation in course of the Boston Tea Party, the 13 colonies Virginia, Massachusetts, Maryland, New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Delaware, New Hampshire, North Carolina, South Carolina, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Georgia wanted to be independent from the British Crown. To crush the revolt, the British government decided to use overwhelming military forces. On April 19, 1775, the first armed conflict took place near Concord, a village 20 miles northwest of Boston. Between 1776 and 1778, the British had some military successes. They captured New York, Saratoga Springs, and Philadelphia. Nevertheless, the Americans had a number of important advantages. They were fighting on their own territory, close to the sources of supply and amid a mostly friendly population. Their patriots had some resourceful military leaders, who had been tested in the French and Indian War. After all, in spite of better equipment and support from German mercenaries, the British troops lost against the American forces under leadership of their commander George Washington, and colonists were able to drive the British away from Boston. The turning point of the war was on July 4, 1776, when the colonists won the important battle near Saratoga. Finally, the 13 colonies declared their independence and established the Congress in Philadelphia. This Declaration of Independence, the foundation document of the United States of America, was composed by Thomas Jefferson. Until 1780, the colonists get support from Spain and the Netherlands and entered into an alliance with the French. The result was an expansion to an international conflict. Near Yorktown, the Americans could defeat the British troops on October 19, 1781. The British government had to admit the independence on September 3, 1783. The former colonies ratified the Constitution and formed the United States in 1789. In total, the war lasted for 8 years and had 4 phases. each with different strategies and characters. 1861. Freedom for the Blacks. The American Civil War, one of the most momentous and controversial periods in American history. After Abraham Lincoln was nominated for president, the Southern states declared that if Lincoln was elected, they would secede the Union and proclaim themselves an independent nation, the Confederate States of America. Lincoln planned to stop the spread of slavery. He became president, and immediately the 11 Southern states, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas left the Union. They formed the Confederate States of America under the reign of President Davis, with the capital Richmond. The Northern states, which represented capitalism, equality, manufacturing, and industry, supported the politics of President Lincoln. The Southern states, which had many agricultural enterprises with cash crops of tobacco, cotton, and sugar cane, fought for keeping the slavery. As the Union did not accept the secede, the Civil War began on April 12, 1861, when the Confederate Army took over Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. Lincoln was forced to declare war. The Confederate Army won the first battles, but at least the Northern states triumphed and won the long and bloody war. 600,000 men on both sides died and over 1,100,000 were injured. The South was devastated, and General Lee surrendered to General Grant on April 9, 1865 at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The Confederate States lost because of the superiority outnumber of the North. Abraham Lincoln abolished the slavery of the blacks on January 1, 1883. John Wilkes Booth killed Lincoln in his moment of victory on April 15, 1865 in the Theater of Washington. 1917 The Great War. Because of the World War I in Europe in 1914, President Woodrow Wilson wanted neutral politics in relation to Europe. In January 1917, Germany declared out submarine warfare against all ships in the waters around the British Isles. Not wanting to give up their trading rights with Great Britain, Wilson threatened them with war. Afterwards, in spring 1915, a German submarine sank the British liner Lusitania with nearly 1,200 people aboard. On August 19, the British steamer Arabic was sunk, too, without any warning. In March 1916, the Germans torpedoed the French ship Sussex. President Wilson arranged an ultimatum, saying that unless Germany stops its methods of submarine warfare, the United States would break off their relations. Germany agreed. On January 22, 1917, the German government proclaimed that they have started their submarine warfare again. When 5 American ships had been sunk in April, the USA declared war on Germany. In October 1918, the U.S. Army, with over 1,750,000 soldiers, had been put to France. President Wilson hoped to an early end of the war, and his famous 14 points, which were set in January 1918 as the basis for peace. In summer 1918, when Germany's armies were beaten back, the German government appealed to Wilson to negotiate based on the 14 points. An armistice was concluded on November 11, when Germany was pronounced guilty and being forced to give up their colonies and reduce their army. Through the First World War, the USA became a world power. 1920 The Golden Twenties. Because of an increasing in crime, poverty, and violence, the situation calls for a quick decision. The American administration was forced to pass the first law of prohibition in 1851. From now on, it was illegal to produce and sell alcohol. In 1873, the American women demonstrated against saloons and other localities with high consumption of alcohol. In 1900, the Anti-Saloon League (ASL) was founded, which had a great influence on politics. Until 1916, 23 of 48 states passed anti-saloon laws. In January 1919, the condition was changed and the production, sale, and transport of alcohol was finally illegal. As a result of that, the illegal distilling of alcohol, smuggled by so-called bootleggers, and illegal selling in speakeasies, camouflaged saloons increased. Corruption in police and politics helped the mafia to install itself in the USA. The most famous Gangster in the 1920s was Al Capone, who had the whole underworld of Chicago in his hands. Tax fraud was the only crime he could be accused of. In 1931, he was sentenced to 11 years custody. 1929, a Black Thursday. The changes wrought in the 1920s were far-reaching. The workweek dropped from 60 to 48 hours. Technology grew and automobiles, radios and movies became hugely popular. With profits soaring and interest rates low, plenty of money was available for investment. Much of it, however, went into reckless speculation in the stock market. In the fall of 1929, the New York Stock Exchange was more active than ever before. On October 24, 1929, Black Thursday, the stock market crashed. Banks were closed. This financial crisis was produced by the speculators James Fisk and Jay Gould. They tried to take the U.S. gold market under their control. On September 20th, they began with buying gold in New York City. On September 24th, they were able to let the prices rise from $140 to $1,635. This rapid rise in price alarmed the New York Stock Exchange. The inflatorian demand for gold could only be stopped if U.S. Minister of Finance George Sewell Boutwell opened $4 million worth of gold to commerce. Fisk and Gould made about $11 million profit. Many investors were on the brinks of ruin.